Welcome to Open Book, a Roanoke City Public Schools podcast. I'm Dr. Verlita White, the proud superintendent of Roanoke City Public Schools, and your host for Open Book. In this episode, we'll be going behind the scenes to talk about the role and process of making decisions in Roanoke City Public Schools. Our fiscal services team is joining us today to talk about the public procurement process, which is the method that governmental bodies use to purchase goods and services. We'll also talk with our operations teams about how snow days are decided. And during our Parent and Guardian University, we'll talk with our academics team about the process of choosing textbooks and how our families can provide valuable input. So goods and services purchased by the government, including public schools, must go through the public procurement process. This is a set of guidelines and procedures that ensure that we buy high-quality goods and services at a reasonable cost and make decisions in a fair and impartial manner, so we are good stewards of taxpayer dollars. If you've ever heard of phrases like competitive sealed bidding or RFPs, these are different terms for types of procurement methods. In Roanoke City Public Schools, we have an entire purchasing department dedicated to working with our schools and departments to purchase needed items and services, from smaller items like shirts to large construction projects. So joining me today are our Chief Financial Officer, Kathleen Jackson, and the Director of Purchasing, Eric Thornton. So Mrs. Jackson and Mr. Thornton, welcome to Open Book, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having us. It's a pleasure to be here.
So there's so much that goes into the purchasing process, and I think it's important for us to be transparent about what those processes are like and what safeguards that we have in place to make sure that we're spending taxpayer dollars responsibly. And there are also some misconceptions about how governments use the public procurement process. For example, that the lowest bidder must always be used, which is not always the case. So Mrs. Jackson, if you could just fill us in on, what is that process like?
Sure. And that's a great place to start. But what you're referring to is a request for proposals, or sometimes heard of as an RFP. And that's exactly as you said. That's one purchasing process where we don't have to go with low bid. And I think it's important to start by sharing that the rules that govern these purchasing procedures are based in law. If we're spending federal grant dollars, there are federal procurement rules we have to follow. Spending state or local tax dollars, there are state laws that we follow that govern all of these processes. So all of the steps are very clear and transparent to make sure the public knows all along the way how we're making those decisions. But as you stated, in a request for proposals process, that's used in a situation where there is more than price that has to be considered. We need to be able to evaluate, maybe different vendors might approach what we need in different methods. So we need to be able to take that into consideration. Mr. Thornton, do you want to add any?
Yeah, I'll just add that in an RFP, the price is usually going to be less than 50% of the scoring criteria to determine who wins a contract, and typically it's between 30 and 40%.
Okay, so can you give us an example of the kinds of contracts that we currently have, that Roanoke City Public Schools that we currently have, that were the result of issuing an RFP?
Yes, actually some of our larger contracts, such as school bus transportation, food service management and operation, and our student health and occupational nursing services, were the result of an RFP process.
So can you tell us a little bit more about what is the RFP? I mean, we hear this term a lot, and we are talking about it here today. I just want to make sure that our listeners understand exactly what an RFP is, and how do we kind of work with the vendors who are trying to win a contract. What's that process really look like? What are we talking about really?
Sure. I'll take that. So we issue a written document where we explain exactly what we're looking for. We tell vendors about our school district and provide as much information as we can to help them put a very detailed top quality proposal together. So one of the most important parts of that document is what we call the scope of work. So that's where we really get into detail of what do we really need. Let's explain exactly what we're looking for so we can help those vendors be as clear as possible. We also spell out the types of information that we want them to provide to us so that we can learn more about their company, their history, their experience with this type of service or product, whatever we're looking for. Then we set up the evaluation, as Mr. Thornton mentioned, in terms of how we're going to score those proposals, what are the things that are most important to us, and how are we going to, as we put an evaluation team of diverse perspectives together, to read all of those proposals and look through all the materials that are provided to us. At the end of the day, how are we going to make that decision? So we make that public in that RFP document so that any proposers know how they're going to be evaluated up front.
So it's a pretty strict and stringent process, one that's governed by quite a few rules as well, right?
Definitely.
And so it's not just who's making kind of the best sales pitch and who's the favorite. It's not about that. It's really about the criteria that we as a school system put together, and then who can come forward, who can kind of meet that criteria, correct?
Absolutely. And so we want to put a process together that gives vendors an opportunity to put their best foot forward. Often, we're not required, but often we have an opportunity for some presentations where vendors can come in and our review committee can ask questions if they need a little bit more information based on the proposals that were originally provided. So we just want to get as much information as we possibly can. That is a confidential process, so I think it's important for the public to know that, that we need to be fair to all of the vendors that are participating in that. And so everyone on that review committee knows to keep that information confidential until a decision is made.
I think you mentioned something that's really critically important, that it's a fair and equitable process. So speaking of that, Mr. Thornton, how will vendors know when RCPS has released an RFP?
Yes, we post those RFPs on our purchasing website, and we also post those RFPs on the state's procurement website, and vendors that are registered with the state purchasing website will get an email notifying them that the RFP has been released, and they will be able to review that and see if it's something they want to submit a proposal for.
And then once the school division has made a decision, how are vendors notified that that decision has been made?
We will post the award notification on the RCPS purchasing website. We will also email the vendors that submitted a proposal, notifying them of the vendor that actually won, and they will be aware of when we've made an award and who won.
So let me ask this question, because I know that this often comes up and is a question that many of our listeners may have as well. So you mentioned that there are some other purchasing methods like bids or getting quotes. So under what circumstances would an RFP make sense as our procurement method as opposed to requesting bids or quotes?
Yeah, as Kathleen mentioned before, an RFP is very useful when we're trying to ask for mostly services where we can spell out what we're looking for, and then the vendors can provide a solution to the problem we're trying to solve and what service we're trying to get met. There's also an official sealed bid process, such as construction, where we work with architects and we tell them exactly what we want, and they bid strictly on price.
Are there any other processes that we can follow to make purchasing decisions?
For smaller dollar amounts between $10,000 and $200,000, we have a request for quote process where we can request quotes from different vendors. We have to request at least 4, and it'll give them an opportunity. It's usually price-based also. Whoever has the lowest price, as long as it's in the best interest of RCPS, then we usually go with a low price, but not always. Sometimes if the low price does not exactly meet our needs, we may go with something other than the low price.
And there's a couple of others I'll just jump in that might be in unique situations. For example, if there's an item needed and it has specific qualities or abilities, and we legitimately cannot find any other comparable product or service, then that would be considered a sole source. And we would carefully document that we made an effort and we're not able to find that this truly is the only vendor that has this item that we need for this particular purpose. And then there's also a time when we might not be competing a particular purchase if it's an emergency. If safety is at a factor, or the health of our students or something along those lines, then the Public Procurement Act allows for that purchase to go forward as quickly as possible to make sure that need is met and that safety can be maintained. So those are a few exceptions.
Wow, what a wealth of information. I just want to thank both of you so much for the work that you do, and thanks for spending time with us today as well. And congratulations again on your Meritorious Budget Award. We run a pretty tight ship here, and so I would just want to thank you and thank the entire Fiscal Services team for all that you do, again, to make sure that we stay on top of it so that we are good stewards of taxpayer dollars and so that there's transparency in our processes. And I just want to thank you again for being here and for joining me today. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, our Chief Operations Officer, Chris Perkins, will be joining me to talk about what's on everybody's mind as we approach winter: snow days. So we'll talk about how we go about making those snow day decisions to either close or to open school late or even to do some early dismissals. So just stay tuned for that. I'm Verlita White, and you're listening to Open Book. Welcome back to Open Book. I'm Verlita White, Superintendent of Roanoke City Public Schools. Well, with winter just a few weeks away, many of our students are starting to wish for a snow day or 2 or 3. And I know that this is something that everybody has an opinion on. Some people love snow and some people hate the snow. But inevitably, when we're anticipating winter weather, everyone has an opinion about whether to close schools or to keep them open. So we thought that we would peel back the curtain today to talk about how those snow day decisions are made, because what seems like a pretty simple process is one that is quite complicated. So I am joined today by Chief Operations Officer Chris Perkins. Mr. Perkins, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And I know that you are out and about very early on, as well as with your team. So, because deciding whether to close schools during winter weather it's a collaborative process. We try to make those decisions as early as possible. I mean, when we can make those decisions the night before, that's ideal, and that's what we want to do. But sometimes that's not possible. Right? It's not possible when we just don't know quite how it's going to hit in the morning. So we do try to get those decisions made, though, by 5:30 a.m. And I just want to thank you and your team, because you guys do a really good job of giving me that call so that we can try to make those calls as early as possible. And we know that our families need time to plan. So we do try to make those calls as early as we can. But when we do have to wait until the morning, you and your team, like I said before, you're up at before the crack of dawn, out on the roads to see what the conditions are like. So can you just walk us through what that process is like from the time that the winter weather is first on our radar to when families are notified if schools are closed or delayed? Walk us through that process.
Sure, I'm happy to. So we have road crews, and our road crews consist of one individual per quadrant of our city. They go out and they check the roads for us. And we know in certain parts of our city where if snow is going to accumulate or ice is going to build up, we know through our experience where those locations are. But what's key is we have devices, we have thermometers, and we check road temperatures. Mm-hmm. Because the outside temperature, precipitation may be falling as snow or ice, but the road temperatures or the bulb temperature may be above freezing, and that will help us make a quick decision. Now, there is a little bit of fluctuation, and that is sometimes those road temperatures are right at freezing. Yeah. And that's when it becomes difficult in the decision making on, what do we do? And so we really depend on our forecast. We work with the National Weather Service out of Blacksburg. Mm-hmm. We work with the city transportation team. And if we can forecast it's coming, we have those discussions ahead of time. But as you know, with winter, sometimes we can't forecast that. So it is a decision based on the totality of circumstances.
And I know sometimes that when we might look right outside our front door and we don't see anything, and then people wonder, well, why are they closing when I don't see anything here? But it may not be the same across town.
It may not be. In fact, Garden City, people know that we have a mountain in the middle of our city limits, and roads in Garden City may be very different than roads in Hirschberger. And it really depends on the weather pattern, too. The Blue Ridge Mountains cut the weather sometimes and separate it. So they'll hit the mountain, weather may fall on the south side of our city, and it may be drizzle on the north side. So it is difficult to make that call. And you may have, depending on the temperatures and the elevation, you may have snow, and it would be very difficult to separate or carve out one school in that decision or two schools.
So just talk a little bit more about how your crew, what they do. To go out to test the roads.
So they're up at 3:30. They are out in their quadrants. We have a group text, and we have radios that we use. They're checking their primary locations, and they have a list, and they know where those are. We work with City Transportation, Dwayne Deardine's group. They do a great job. Our snow fighters are second to none in this valley. Mm-hmm. And they tell us also where they have issues. So they go out, they check those issues first. They do some road temperatures, and then they will move and drive some of our bus routes. There's a lot of responsibility that goes with transporting children to and from school. So we've got to check as many of those bus routes as possible. The key there is they've got to call and make a decision on what they are seeing and share that with me. So then I make a call to you, Dr. White, and to our Chief Communications and Marketing Officer, Kelly Sandridge, and because we have to get the information out to their parents and guardians. And so we try to make that call between 5:15, but for sure before 5:30. We try to do it before 5:15. And it becomes problematic. Before the sun comes up, it is sometimes the totality of circumstances could be, how fast is the front going to move through if it's a weather front? When will the precipitation, ice or snow stop? Can we get crews in time if we decide to go early to clear the sidewalks, the roofs, the parking lots? Because it's not just the kids we're worried about, it's the staff. How do they get in
exactly
and drive in? And some of our staff come from outside of our city. So, we've got to be concerned about that as well.
I love how you said that it's not just about the roads. And certainly we want our buses to be able to get through and to travel safely along the roads. But we want our staff members to get to school safely. And it's also about clearing the parking lots and making sure that the entrances to our schools are safe to walk on, and the sidewalks are safe as well. So there's so much that goes into that, and you and your team do such an amazing job that I know that those decisions are not always easy, and especially when you have to make that recommendation to me. Some of the snow day calls are some of the hardest decisions that superintendents have to make, but it is done with everyone kind of in mind. I also, as a mom, I also had a different perspective once my children became teenagers and became of driving age, that now you have novice drivers out on the road, and we do take into consideration as well, that we want to make sure that our novice drivers out on the road can be safe as well. So all of those factors are critically important. But some might ask, why do we even need to close for snow days anymore? That we're now one-to-one when it comes to every student having a laptop. We've been through a pandemic where we've had remote learning. So to answer that question, because I know that my brother even asked me that question. Well, I guess there's you'll have no more snow days because everybody has a laptop now. Talk a little bit about why we still need snow days.
Yeah, we do. And while we have one of the best IT departments in the state, and they've done a great job getting us all the software and hardware needed to go one-to-one for our students and staff, it boils down to a lot of things. One, if it is a heavy snowstorm, we could have power outages. So if we try to go virtual, that could be an impediment for a handful or even a lot of our students being able to log in and get into those sessions, whether they're asynchronous or synchronous. The other thing we have to worry about is access to internet. Some of our students depend on libraries or even our Wi-Fi at our schools where they need to get to log on. Now, we will provide hotspots, but there are occasions that we don't know that need exists, and we work to try to identify that, but we may not have the access that we need completely across our city, and that's important. It's an equity issue for our students. It could be an equity issue for our staff. We may have staff members that, if they live outside the city or in the city, have power outages, and so they won't be able to provide the instruction that's needed. So we do need snow days.
Yeah.
That way, we don't leave anybody out, because then there's a catch-up that has to take place, and we know from the pandemic that we're really tired of the catch-up that takes place.
Right.
We want to get our kids where they need to be as fast as possible.
Exactly. So why might schools be delayed versus canceled? That's another popular question that we get.
That is really based on what we believe, and we really work collaboratively with our the National Weather Station here in Blacksburg. Mm-hmm. We pay for a service where we get information, and they tell us the front's going to move through. If we believe that the front will move through and we can get the cleanup at our schools that's needed to make sure they're safe for everybody to get into, then we'll open school, because we know that being at school is the best place for our kids during the day. We have food for them. We have all of the tools needed for a proper education. So we want to get them in school so we don't miss that time, that in-the-seat educational opportunity that we want to provide. So we want them in school, and we may consider a late opening if we can get all those things in place and we can go safely.
So, Mr. Perkins, talk about early dismissals, because I know that that's a complicated process as well, and one when parents have to leave work, when it's unexpected. You get the robocall or you get a phone call and you say, hey, schools are being closed early for various reasons. Parents might want to know, well, how are those decisions made? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, there's a lot goes into that decision. One, how fast we can mobilize bus drivers. Yeah. Two, have we fed our students before we send them home? And do we have the capability of getting that meal completed and done and served? There is so many moving parts. It's teachers making sure that they communicate with students and how the dismissal is going to go. It's our communications team making sure the parents and guardians know that we're sending them home. Right. It's our facilities team making sure that, depending on the reason, that it's safe for the school, to dismiss. Can we keep, has the snow come upon us? Is it ice? What are we doing? Can we make sure we can dismiss safely? So we have to, make sure our sidewalks are clear and all of that. That is probably, compared to closing or late arrival, mm-hmm. early dismissal is probably the most difficult decision to make, because you can go too late and create a safety concern. You can go too early and everybody is going to say, well, why did we close? Because it didn't rain, it didn't ice, it didn't snow. So there is a lot that goes into that, and those moving
and the
parts.
after-school activities.
Oh my goodness, we got to cancel those. So that's a great catch.
Right.
So we have to work with. At this point, our communications team is probably the most important part of this, mm-hmm. Because they've got to get all the messages out. But then we have to worry about. Some parents just simply can't get their children. So What do we do with those children or students, or our students, when we can't deliver them to their house? And some parents then, because they try to get to school, and so we got traffic concerns. So yeah, that's a tough call. But again, like we do, it's very collaborative. We have we try to get all the facts we can as fast as possible, and we try to make an educated decision in the best interests of our students. And those, again, we won't please everybody, but we make those with as much information as we gather. And it's not just Dr. White and myself, it's everybody from across the school division. We may have to talk to principals, and they may, I've got students out on a field trip. What do we do with those students? So there's a lot of communication that takes place.
So sometimes we have to close schools, and it's not necessarily for snow days. Sometimes schools have to dismiss early for other circumstances like power outages. And so can you just talk about what that process is like as well?
Yeah, and it's not just power outages, it's water main breaks.
Yes,
right. The things that we need at school, of course, you need power at school. You got to have lights, you got to have the ability to use all that technology that our IT department's brought to us, but you also need water, and you need the ability to cook and serve and work out of the cafeteria. We need students to be able to get to our restroom facilities, and you need to be able to see to do those things to the best of our abilities. And so there are times that we have to make that call based on everything we know, and we have to work with American Electric Power to determine it, and that is not a specific science. Determining on when they can get a crew to a site. Let's take a transformers out on a pole. It may take a crew 30 minutes to get to that site. They may get there in 5 minutes, but then it depends on what kind of work they have to do to restore that power. So that there's such a variance in how long it will take. And so that's a call, again, that we make a very educated call. We try to check with all of our partners. If it's the water authority, we check with them. How long will it be? Now, we try to plan those. And when these are planned, we can work through that much easier. But as you know, water main breaks with the winter coming on, we freeze a pipe. Next thing you know, we have a water main break. Right. We don't have water for school. Same with power. We may have an ice storm, takes power down. A derecho like we had a few years back knocks out power for a while. The good thing is we have a continuity of operations plan. Mm-hmm. So if we have long-term power outages or long-term water issues, we have a process in place where we can set up a school at another location, and we have those steps that we will use to do just that. But we hope they're a couple hours, and if they're a couple hours, we may be able to deal with it, but we may not. It depends on the circumstances.
Is there anything else that you want parents and staff members, students to know about making these calls about when to close schools?
Well, we're not going to please everyone out there in our community. There are some that think we should go to school and some that think we should stay home. But I can promise you that we will do our very best to pull all the information we have together to make the best, most realistic, reasonable decision that we can. And we'll always do that, because if we put kids first and we make the decision in the best interest of our kids, then that's all that we can be asked of, and that's all we should, or that's what we should strive to do for our parents and guardians.
Indeed, and I know how you feel about this is exactly how I feel as well. That safety first. Safety first. So, Mr. Perkins, thank you so much for joining me here today on Open Book and giving us that kind of behind-the-scenes look and peeling back the curtain on those snow days and school closures and early dismissals and late arrivals. And we're looking forward to bringing everybody together. Hopefully, we won't have too many of those this year. I know that some are wishing for them. There are many things that people do to wish for snow days, turning the pajamas inside out, flushing ice cubes down the toilet, all of those things. I've heard them all. So I'm not going to step on any of those wishes, but we just want to thank you, and I want to thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for being here today.
My pleasure.
All right, so coming up next, our Executive Director of Academics, Greg Johnston, will join us to talk about how we review and choose textbooks so our students have the best instructional materials available. You're listening to Open Book. You're listening to Open Book. As we close out our episode, joining me is Greg Johnston, our Executive Director of Academics. Mr. Johnston, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, hello, Dr. White. Thank you for having me.
So, Mr. Johnston, as you know, in Roanoke City Public Schools, we provide our students with high-quality instructional materials across all grade levels and subjects. So, textbooks are reviewed regularly as curriculum changes, and sometimes we change textbooks when the standards change as well. And that means involving lots of stakeholders. We get a lot of people involved. So this whole episode is about how we make decisions. So we wanted to just fill people in on how we make those textbook decisions. So why do we have a process like this involving so many people? And why do we change textbooks periodically?
Well, it's a great question. The Virginia Department of Education every 7 years has to review and sometimes revise their standards. When they revise their standards, sometimes that will create a need for new textbooks based on the subject area. And so then that begins our process as a school division to work through that.
And so when we do have to make that change based on those recommendations, based on the standards changing, and based on what the State Department tells us that we need to do, tell us a little bit about that process. Talk about that process, how we engage our stakeholders.
So after the standards have changed, and if there are significant changes that we will need to purchase a new textbook, and first of all, we start with a committee, and that committee is based on stakeholders within the school division, such as the specialists, principals, teachers, could be content experts that work within it to choose textbooks from a variety, because the Department of Education does provide a list of approved textbooks, and we choose from that list. It is an extensive list at times, so we want to narrow that down. After we've narrowed it down, then we start getting involved our teachers, our stakeholders such as our parents, our community, and our school board members too, to be a part of that process.
So talk a little bit more about our parents and our families and how they're involved in this process.
So we definitely enjoy having our parents because, first of all, they are the child's first teacher, and we want them to be involved in their child's education, but we also want them to understand all of sometimes which can be considered teacher speak and some of the terminology. We want them to understand exactly what the child is talking about during the school day, but also have a stake in that decision making too, because their child is going to be using these materials sometimes up to 7 or 8 years within the school district.
Is this the same process that we use for, let's say, library books?
We do have a little bit of a different process for library books. However, we do have committees that we work with when we're purchasing large orders or different change. Like if it's a drastic change from what we currently have, we do want to get a lot of input before. We just don't make quick decisions on things like that.
Excellent. So when we're talking about what's coming up, and our parents being involved, is there anything coming up that our parents should know about, that if they'd like to be involved in that process of selecting the materials, that they can be involved?
Absolutely. We do have an opportunity for preschool curriculum materials that we're looking at. We're evaluating them, working with our staff currently now, and some of the changes that may have happened in the state, but we are going to be reviewing curriculum for preschool. And we do give an opportunity. First of all, we go through that same process where we work with our teachers, we work with our administrators and our specialists within the school district, but we also want to have parents to come in to look at the materials and to give us feedback and to ask questions, because we do enjoy that, because there may be something that we're not thinking about when we're going through this process. They may make a comment about it and may be able to change or maybe use something different because of their comments.
Now for preschool, it's really a review of those materials, not necessarily textbooks, but the materials. So what kinds of things will parents take a look at when they're looking at the preschool materials?
So you're correct. We don't have a textbook for preschool. However, the curriculum could be the materials that are going to be used, the books that are authentic literature that could be used, but also we want them to understand the process, because based on our strategic plan, we want to have a strong transition from preschool into kindergarten. So our pre-K curriculum is going to be very important moving forward.
I always say that everything that we do starts early, and so that's really important for our parents to be involved very early on in a child's educational journey. So thank you so much for joining us today on Open Book, and thank you to all of our guests as well for joining us today to talk about how decisions are made in RCPS. As a reminder, you can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. And you can also listen on the RCPS website. I'm Dr. Verlita White, Superintendent of Roanoke City Public Schools. Thanks for joining us, and we hope that you'll tune in again next month for another episode of Open Book.